Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom.
A few weeks ago, a storm broke out inside Britain's royal family when Prince William uncovered a chilling truth. Camilla had tried to harm King Charles while he lay helpless in a hospital bed. To understand how it all began, we must return to the shocking moment when the king's health relapsed. Could the Queen ever tried to harm Prince Charles? Join us as we reveal the current happenings in the royal family. Everything appeared fine in the grand corridors of Buckingham Palace when King Charles suddenly fell. What began as a routine meeting with senior aides quickly spiraled into chaos. According to eyewitnesses, his face lost color, his words trailed into silence, and before anyone could make sense of it, he collapsed onto the polished table, sending papers and glasses scattering across the room. The palace broke into panic as courtiers scrambled. Attendants rushed to his side, and within moments, the King of England was being lifted onto a stretcher, rushed past gilded doors, and into the waiting royal ambulance. The destination was St. Mary's Hospital, where a team of specialists had already been alerted. The news did not take hours to reach the outside world. It took minutes. Palace officials had barely released a short statement when the media machine began to roar. In the middle of this storm, the royal family rushed into action. Prince William, accompanied by Kate, moved with urgency, their convoy weaving through central London to reach the hospital. Princess Anne, always a steady force in family crises, was not far behind. Their intent was clear. They needed to be at their father's side, not just out of love, but out of duty. This was not only a family emergency, it was a moment that carried the weight of the monarchy itself. Yet as they hurried through the hospital corridors, they had no idea that someone so close would block their path. Keep watching, because the details will shock you. You see, Camilla had arrived first. As the king's wife, she was escorted directly into the intensive ward, and it was there that she planted her authority. When William and Anne tried to enter, hospital staff, under her instruction, stopped them. Camilla invoked her role as the king's lawful spouse, insisting that she alone had the right to remain by his side. Her tone was firm, her presence unyielding, and the younger royals, though shocked, found themselves locked out. The air between them grew heavy. This was not just about a medical protocol, it was about control. Camilla wasted no time controlling the narrative. While doctors worked tirelessly inside, she stepped outside briefly, surrounded by concerned family members, palace and hospital staff. She spoke of her devotion to her husband, painted herself as the tireless caretaker, and urged them to keep faith in his recovery. To onlookers, she appeared to be the grieving yet steadfast queen consort, holding the monarchy's dignity intact. To those within the family, it felt like a performance crafted with precision. William and Anne exchanged looks that carried more meaning than words could. Both had long understood Camilla's influence, but this was something different. The moment Charles had fallen, she had not only taken control of his bedside but also the public stage. To them, her gestures seemed less about love and more about power. Kate tried to soothe tensions, but it was clear that a new line had been drawn. Inside the hospital, Camilla ensured she was the only one consistently at the king's side. She managed every update from the doctors, decided what left the ward and what stayed inside, and kept her position unchallenged. Whenever William tried to press for details, he was given vague answers or redirected by staff under Camilla's orders. Even Princess Anne, with her reputation for speaking her mind, found herself stonewalled. Camilla called meetings with palace aides, instructed communications officers on the tone of press releases, and ensured that when the cameras rolled, her face was the one most visible. She presented herself not only as the king's wife, but as the natural guardian of the monarchy during his crisis. To those who watched closely, it was clear she was tightening her hold. The tension only grew sharper as hours turned into days. William and Anne felt sidelined, their access limited, their voices muted. Both were restless, aware that every hour their father remained unconscious was an hour Camilla cemented her influence. William in particular struggled, torn between the role of son desperate to be near his father and the role of heir who understood the stakes of the moment. The monarchy was not simply symbolic, it was an institution tied to history, politics, and global perception. The idea that it could be guided entirely by Camilla's hand while Charles lay vulnerable unsettled him deeply. Still, Camilla played her part flawlessly. In front of the press, she never faltered, always showing the calm devotion of a wife in crisis. She walked the hospital corridors with dignity, took updates with gravity, and addressed the public with rehearsed warmth. She was photographed holding Charles's hand as machines beeped beside him, a scene that pulled at the public's heartstrings. Every image broadcasted her as the figure holding the kingdom together. But behind the curtains, the whispers in the palace were growing. Staff members who had served under Charles for years began to feel the shift. Decisions once made through collaboration were now dictated. Doors once open were now closed. Even the Queen's personal secretary found himself answering more to Camilla than to the man he had served for decades. Sources also confirmed that William and Anne met privately more than once, seeking ways to navigate the situation without sparking open conflict. Both recognized that to challenge Camilla openly at such a delicate moment could fracture the monarchy's image further. Yet both also understood that if they remained passive, the monarchy might slip into her hands entirely. The line between family loyalty and institutional responsibility was blurring, and each day that passed made the choice more urgent. What had begun as a sudden collapse of a frail king was becoming something larger. While doctors monitored his heartbeat and lungs, another kind of calculation was being made in the shadows, one that was less about medicine and more about power. The king lay silent, the machines keeping him alive humming steadily in the background. Camilla sat close, holding the role she had claimed with unshakable determination. Beyond the hospital walls, William and Anne weighed their next move. What none of them could predict was how this moment, born from illness, would open the door to betrayal, confrontation, and a test of loyalty that would shake the monarchy to its core. Keep watching, because we're about to reveal the wildest part of the story. In the days following King Charles's collapse, the hospital no longer felt like a neutral place of healing. It had become a fortress where Camilla's grip grew stronger with each passing hour. She ensured every corridor leading to the king's ward was guarded by staff who answered to her. Nurses who had once shared updates freely with William and Anne now hesitated, claiming instructions came directly from the queen consort. Every decision about who entered the room or who saw the medical charts passed through her approval. Even senior doctors found themselves reporting to her before speaking to anyone else. For William, this tightening control was suffocating. He paced the hospital waiting areas, frustration written plainly on his face, while Kate tried to temper his anger. Unknown to the public, Camilla was engaged in a much darker discovery. Late one evening, while sorting through Charles's personal belongings brought from the palace, she stumbled across a folder that carried his final wishes. In it lay the truth that ignited her fury. Charles had left instructions that William would inherit not only the throne, but also specific assets and ceremonial powers that she had quietly assumed would be hers. The realization that her future, in black and white, was one of fading influence and not absolute authority, struck her like a blade. The anger that surged in her was cold, not fiery. It was the sort of anger that led to calculation rather than outbursts. She understood the monarchy was as much about perception as it was about legal documents. If she could not rewrite the will, she would rewrite the moment. She began plotting carefully, ensuring that her face to the world remained that of the faithful wife, while inside she rehearsed ways to push William further from the center. The longer Charles remained unconscious, the longer she could build her role as the guardian of the royal family. Her moment family came on one of those nights. Prepare your mind for the revelation that will change everything you thought you knew about Queen Camilla. With the corridors quiet and the ward dimly lit, Camilla sat alone beside Charles. The machines hummed, their steady rhythm the only sound in the room. She leaned close to him, her voice low but laced with venom. Words poured out that no one else was meant to hear. She confessed that it was never him she had loved most. It was the throne, the crown, the power that came with being queen. She spoke of how the institution bent for those who seized it, not for those who waited politely. Her tone was chilling, her presence menacing, as she hovered dangerously near the ventilator tube that kept his fragile body alive. What she did not realize was that William was standing just outside the door. He had returned to the ward, determined to see his father even if it meant confronting her. Hearing her words froze him in place, his anger mixing with shock as he realized the depth of her ambition. Through the small window of the door, he saw her hand brush the equipment, lingering too long near the ventilator. The sight sent his heart racing. Then, in an instant, the steady rhythm of the machines broke. Alarms blared, doctors were summoned, and Charles's fragile life hung on a thread. Nurses rushed into the room as they fought to stabilize him. Camilla, without missing a beat, shifted her posture. The venom disappeared, replaced by a mask of panic. She clutched the king's hand, cried out for help, and played the role of a wife, horrified by a sudden medical turn. To the staff who entered, she appeared distraught, her devotion unquestionable. William, standing at the edge of the chaos, felt the weight of the moment crash down on him. He had witnessed what had happened, but to the doctors and nurses, he was simply the man lingering outside the ward at the exact time disaster struck. It did not take long for whispers to spread. Staff members who had always admired him now exchanged uneasy glances. Some wondered if his presence had agitated Camilla. Others suggested he might have interfered in his desperation to see his father. Camilla never directly accused him, but her silence was loud enough to fan the flames. By morning, the hospital corridors buzzed with gossip. The story twisted as it moved from one mouth to another. Some said William had forced his way into the ward and disrupted the machines. Others claimed he had argued loudly with Camilla moments before the alarm sounded. None of it was true, but the lack of clarity worked in Camilla's favor. She stayed quiet, her expressions of grief convincing enough to protect her from suspicion, while the unspoken blame drifted toward the king's heir. For William, the frustration grew unbearable. He knew what he had seen and heard, but without proof, his words would be dismissed as the claims of an impatient son eager to claim the throne. The careful way Camilla had staged the moment left him cornered. His loyalty to his father demanded silence, yet his loyalty to the monarchy urged him to speak. The conflict weighed heavily, leaving him restless and uneasy. Camilla, meanwhile, continued her act flawlessly. She thanked the medical staff for their dedication, spoke tenderly to the cameras about Charles's fragile condition, and ensured that every photograph taken showed her as the steadfast wife at his side. No one outside the hospital walls suspected the truth of what had nearly happened. To the public, she was holding the monarchy together with grace. To those who had seen enough to question, fear kept them quiet. The king lay between life and death, unaware of the storm that raged around him. His collapse had sparked a battle far larger than his health, and in that hospital ward, betrayal had almost claimed his life. William walked the corridors with suspicion following him like a shadow, while Camilla sat by the bed as if nothing had happened. The crisis was no longer only medical, it was political, personal, and perilous. And as the alarms faded back into silence and the machines returned to their steady rhythm, the stage was set for a struggle that would no longer stay hidden behind hospital doors. The story spread among the hospital and palace staff like wildfire. The narrative did not spread on its own. Camilla was careful to never speak directly against William, but she carefully fueled the suspicions with calculated silences and well-placed comments. She would sigh heavily when asked about that night, letting reporters fill the gaps. When courtiers questioned her, she responded with pity rather than denial, creating the impression that she was shielding William from deeper blame. It was a subtle performance, but it worked. The heir to the throne began to look less like a grieving son and more like an ambitious man too eager for power. Public opinion fractured. Some believed William was the victim of cruel speculation, while others argued that Camilla's composure proved she was the only steady hand left in the monarchy. However, William's frustration reached its breaking point. According to anonymous sources, he sought Camilla directly, determined to strip away the facade. Inside the hospital, away from cameras, he confronted her with the anger he had carried since overhearing her venomous confession. He accused her of tampering with his father's life, of using the king's illness as a stage for her ambition. Camilla, far from shaken, met his fury with mockery. She reminded him that the world saw her as a devoted wife and saw him as an impatient heir. His word against hers meant nothing, and she knew it. Her confidence only deepened his rage. For days, William wrestled with helplessness. Then came the moment that changed everything. King Charles, still fragile but briefly conscious, stirred awake. William wasted no time. He sat by his father's bedside and told him what he had seen and heard. He spoke of Camilla's whispered betrayal and of her hand hovering near the ventilator tube. Charles listened, though his body remained weak. The shock in his eyes was clear, but he did not rush to judgment. He demanded proof before any decision could be made, understanding that the monarchy could not rely on suspicion alone. That challenge set William's resolve. He knew words would never be enough, so he turned to the one source that could not be twisted, the hospital's surveillance system. With the help of trusted staff, still loyal to his father, he secured access to the footage from the ward. Hours of recordings were reviewed until the moment appeared. There it was, Camilla leaning over Charles, whispering words that dripped with contempt for the man and devotion to the throne. There was her hand, too close to the ventilator, lingering long enough to disturb it. The alarms that followed told the rest of the story. The evidence was damning. It was not only her actions, but her own words captured in grainy sound that sealed her fate. The mask she had worn so carefully in public was torn away by the very machines meant to guard a patient's safety. William replayed the footage again and again, not out of doubt, but to steady himself for what came next. He brought the proof to his father. Charles, though frail, watched with growing heaviness. Every whispered admission, every gesture toward the machine, cut deeper than any illness could. His wife of years, the woman who had styled herself as his greatest defender, had betrayed him in his most vulnerable state. The betrayal was personal, but it was also institutional. If left unchecked, it could shatter the monarchy's foundation. Charles's decision was slow but certain. He resolved that the truth could not remain hidden. To preserve the dignity of the crown, the betrayal had to be addressed openly, not buried beneath silence. It would mean exposing not only Camilla's actions, but also the cracks that had formed within the royal family itself. Yet for Charles, the greater risk lay in allowing a traitor to remain at the heart of the monarchy. In that hospital room, the king's resolve crystallized. He would act publicly, not privately. Camilla's reign of quiet manipulation was nearing its end. The man who had lain silent for days would now rise to strip her of the very influence she had fought to secure. The decision set in motion events that would shake not only the palace, but also the nation watching from afar. What began with whispers in a dimly lit ward was about to explode in front of cameras, microphones, and the judgment of millions. Will he go ahead? Keep watching for the answer. King Charles sat in silence for hours after everything had been revealed to him. The truth weighed heavily on his shoulders, but his mind was sharper than most people realized. He thought carefully about the situation, understanding that exposing the scandal to the press would not only ruin Camilla, but also leave deep scars on the monarchy itself. The world outside was already hungry for royal drama, and once the flames were lit, they could never be put out. He knew that if the footage was released, it would travel across continents in minutes, overshadowing every other matter. Instead of allowing his family to be dragged through the mud, he made the decision to contain the fire before it could spread. Orders went out quietly and quickly. The surveillance footage that could have shattered the royal house was locked away, never to be seen by the public. The media, who had already caught whispers of the storm, were told to drop the matter entirely. Editors who lived off sensational headlines reluctantly bowed to the command, and the story that could have defined the era was silenced before it could fully surface. Behind closed doors, the palace tightened its grip, choosing dignity over exposure, even if it meant hiding a wound that would never heal. But Charles was not about to let betrayal go unpunished. He may have been frail, his health faltering, but he was still the king. When he rose, His frame shook with weakness. Yet there was no mistaking the authority that carried him. He stripped Camilla of every royal title she had clung to for years. The woman who once styled herself as queen consort was reduced to nothing more than a disgraced figure, erased from the very fabric of the monarchy she had fought to be part of. Camilla did not accept her fate quietly. She entered the chamber with fury in her eyes, her voice trembling with indignation. She denied everything, refusing to acknowledge the evidence that had condemned her. But her protests meant little. Her denials could not wash away the weight of what had already been decided. Those who had once nodded politely in her presence now looked upon her with contempt. In their eyes, the illusion of a queen was gone, replaced by the shadow of a woman who had reached too high and fallen too hard. The judgment of the people came swiftly. Security stepped forward, their hands firm but not cruel, and they escorted her out of the palace she had once ruled over with pride. It was not just an exit, it was an exile. As she was led through the halls, whispers filled the air, sharp and unforgiving. Those who witnessed the scene branded her the traitor queen, a name that clung to her like a permanent scar. By the time she stepped outside those gates, her downfall was complete. However, that wasn't all. Her banishment carried her back to Wiltshire, to the old home she had once known before the crown had changed her life. The grandeur of royal halls was replaced by the silence of aging walls. There were no crowds, no ceremonies, no cameras waiting for her smile. She was surrounded only by the reminders of a past life she had abandoned in her pursuit of power. The contrast was brutal. She had traded everything for ambition, and in the end, ambition had left her with nothing. Shame consumed her in ways she had never imagined. The life she had built, brick by brick, was gone in a single moment. Every title, every privilege, every ounce of respect she had earned through years of maneuvering had crumbled to dust. She sat alone, realizing that the very greed that had driven her forward was the same force that had destroyed her. She could not escape the truth that it had been her own hands that had shaped her downfall. As days turned to nights, the silence of her exile grew heavier. She replayed her decisions over and over again, tracing the path that had led her here. There had been chances to step back, to choose humility over hunger, but she had ignored them all. Now, the echoes of her ambition haunted her, whispering reminders of everything she had lost. Her reflection in the mirror no longer showed a queen, but a woman stripped of everything but regret. Her story had shifted from one of triumph to one of tragedy, and the world around her carried on without her. The monarchy endured, scarred, but still standing, while she faded into obscurity. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that her pursuit of power had not only destroyed her standing, but had also carved her out of the history she once hoped to dominate. Yet her exile was not the end of the tale. It was merely a pause, a moment where one queen's fall left the palace shaken, and the throne marked by betrayal. The kingdom waited, uneasy, knowing that shadows always linger long after the storm has passed. And as Camilla sat in Wiltshire, broken and forgotten, the stage quietly began to set for what would come next. The monarchy had survived her, but survival always comes with a price, and that price was yet to be fully understood. Sources also reported that Camilla moved like a ghost in her own house in Wiltshire, haunted by memories of the crown she had once worn. The silence pressed against her, heavier than any judgment, and every creak of the floor reminded her of what she had lost. She had thought the crown would make her untouchable, that titles and ceremonies could erase the doubts people had about her, but it had only magnified them. Stripped of everything, she began to see how fragile her triumph had always been, built not on loyalty or love, but on ambition, sharpened into greed. She sat by the window at night, staring into the emptiness, knowing the kingdom had already moved on without her. Yet she also knew her fall would not last forever. Thank you for staying with us. Why is the Queen acting desperate? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.